Cool. Okay, so this is an early prototype of RRED. It's a working title. Um, and this is just a quick look at the game. So you can see here that I've got a infinitely long pathway, and I'm spawning blocks, and these are randomly generated locations along this pathway. Um, and I'm spawning them in sections. Oh, I didn't realize that Z fighting was happening there. Okay, well, that needs to be fixed. Anyway, so these blocks, the way they're being generated is using the Poisson disk algorithm, Poisson disk sampling. And if you didn't know what that was already, hello, life. Here's a simple explanation. So I've got a big box that I spawn stuff in. Then I select a random point. Spawn a point. And then I say, okay, pick a random point that I have spawned. Well, there's one, so I'll pick that one. And then I have defined for the algorithm a minimum range where nothing can spawn closer to this, closer than this to that object. And then a maximum range, which is like an upper bound for the area around the object to check to see if I can spawn something there. So then I say, okay, well, let's try a random point in here. Let's say this one. And that's random. I take a random rotation out of 360, and I take a random distance between rmin and rmax, and then, I do the vector math to get the xy, and then I've got the point. So then I say, okay, well, check in its minimum range to see, hey, is there anything too close to this thing to spawn for me to be able to spawn it here? And you say, no, there actually isn't. So then that one's good. That one is spawned now. Then I go back and I've got just the 2 points, and I pick which one I want to spawn in, so I don't have to redraw the circle. I'll do this one. Okay, and then I try and spawn another point. Okay, I try here. Oh, it turns out this point's too close to this other object, so that point didn't work. Okay, I'll try again. Okay, that point didn't work. Okay, I'll try again. Okay, that point worked. And you try 30 times per object. And let's say I've done that for this one like a bunch of times. And then I try to spawn here, oh, it didn't work, here, oh, it didn't work, here, oh, it didn't work. Some amount of times, which normally is 30, and it all failed. So then this point, I say, is an inactive point. So this object still gets spawned here, but I don't check to see if something can be spawned next to it again. And then, you keep going until you've populated the whole area. And then underneath all this, there's some simplification going on. So let's say I have a point spawned over here, and I've got like a bunch of points, like 10,300, some amount that's too many. I don't need to check the distance between every single point, because surely there's a way to tell that this point way over here is definitely too far to matter. And the way this is solved is with a grid. So you've got a grid of points, in this grid, the grid size is actually important because it is spaced such that it is impossible mathematically for 2 points to be within the same grid space. So if I had one point right here, then it would be impossible to put one anywhere else in this circle because of the size of the minimum circle, right? However, if I had an adjacent one, obviously, you can see I could maybe put a point over here somewhere. So what you end up needing to do is, if you have a point, in a circle, like in one grid spot, you have to check all adjacent, including diagonal grid spots. And then, so you just check within those 9 squares, and you say, okay, well, is it there? And if the answer is there a thing there? And if the answer is yes, then you check the distance between. So then you might see the problem already. What if I've got a box and then another box right next to it, and I'm trying to spawn blocks that should still not touch each other right here, right? So the clear problem is, well, if I spawn a block here, then I shouldn't spawn anything here. But when I'm spawning in this grid, I have no knowledge of where in the grid these objects fall. So if I do want to check them, well, first of all, I have to check them, right? I have to check for every position, unless, I place them in the grid somehow. And the nice thing is, I know that these objects way over here in this grid will never matter. So I can say, okay, only objects in these closest row of grid spaces to this grid will actually matter. And that looks nice when I'm like this. However, if I imagine it's like skewed a little bit, it gets a little bit more complicated than that. And the way I do that is I just check, okay, well, get all the blocks that are within this area. And then the way that you check with the individual objects might differ depending on how many objects you plan on spawning. If you're doing like 1,000 and your game needs to be really, really optimized, you could extend the size of this grid by 1 block in every direction, and then never spawn anything in that grid, but still check those spaces to see if there's a block in them for the purpose of spawning along the edge. And that would be fine. And then furthermore, well, what if I happen to, because in this bunny hopping game, I want the blocks to be spaced such that you can always jump between 2 close ones. So if I've got, a grid here and another grid here, and I've got some blocks that are pretty far back over here, but still, in the first grid, and then some blocks that are pretty far back over here, but still within the first grid, they're not going to be like nicely spaced, right? Like I could have one here, and then maybe I have one block right here, and then the rest are like, a little further back. Well, then there's no like nice way to jump between these 2 platforms. So the simple solution is, like I was saying before, is to give these blocks, add these blocks into this grid before I create it. So these, I'm calling them seeds, but not like a random number generator seed, but for seeding the location that these blocks can spawn in somehow. So instead of picking a random location anywhere on the grid, I say, well, use some blocks that I already know are close. And then you say, okay, well, spawn somewhere outside of that, but inside of that. And then it'll try and spawn over here, and you say, sorry, that's too far. You spawn over here, that's out of the grid. You check. And then you try and spawn over here, say, okay, that's in the grid. And then I check against all things that are currently in the grid and things that are close, and then objects that are outside of the grid over here, and it says, okay, you're good. So then it spawns object there, and then the rest goes on normally. And you can see that's mostly what I have here. I've got, well, I still have the visualization for the blocks that have already despawned, but you can see I've got most of these are green lines, and that's spawns within one grid. So you could see like the middle chunks of one of these sections, it's all the green lines. But then when I'm going from a seed to the new grid, I've got these red lines here to show that happening. And you can see it gets a little messy. The problem, what happens that spawns these blocks on top of each other, is actually the green lines. And actually, I should give corner, corner. I need to make it so that that has vision of 2 farther back instead of just 1 farther back. But like over here, you could tell, well, this is obviously too close to one of these, actually. Let me just... Yeah, right here. You see these 2 green lines. Pointing with my hand. These 2 green lines here, they're going backwards. And then, you know, the grid breaks right here. So, you know, these blocks, when they're spawning something close to them, they don't have any vision of this block or this block. So they say, oh yeah, that's like a nice open empty space. I can just spawn some stuff over here. So they do. And that's the biggest problem that I have right now. And that has the solutions that I was talking about before. I just gotta type them out. And then we'll be good. Thanks for watching, or whatever.